The enslavers had written a script. We were to till the land, but never to own it. We were to build wealth for others, but never for ourselves. But something African within us refused that destiny. So, from many nations, we became one people. What was meant to erase us became the forge of our freedom. So 12 years later, on November 18, 1803, at the great Battle of Vertières in the northern part of Haiti, the vow of Bracaiman was kept. An imperial power that had dominated continents discovered a truth older than thrones. No empire can outlast the people who remember him. From that victory emerged Haiti, the first Black Republic. The shockwave that which Louisiana, South America, and every plantation where freedom whispered. The world learned a lesson it tried hard to forget, that Africans, even in captivity, were authors of history, not its subjects. History often remembers the Battle of Waterloo. Conscience must also remember the great Battle of Vertières. The moment an enslaved people revealed that the age of empires had limits. Our freedom was met with a legacy, and it was met with a heavy price. In 1825, an indemnity of 150 million francs in gold was imposed under the shadow of warships, an economic burden that shaped Haiti's destiny for generations. Yet we endured, as Africa endured. Out of death, we forged dignity. Out of change, we fashioned creativity. Haiti and Africa were never apart. They were twin flames burning on opposite shore of the same ocean. The transatlantic slave trade was the most sustained act of dehumanization in human history. For 4 centuries, more than 12 million Africans were torn from lands, family, and faith. They built empires they were not permitted to inhabit. Well, they were not permitted to taste. Yet, from that furnace rose Haiti, the first victorious African revolution. And long before chains and ships, Africa had already proclaimed the dignity of human life. In 1235, on the plains of Uruk and Futa, which is in the present-day map, the Menden Charter was proclaimed, a sacred covenant that outlawed slavery by raid, affirmed the sanctity of every human life, upheld the rights of women, protected families, and promoted food security, expression, and social harmony. Long before others spoke of enlightenment, Africa had already articulated a moral order rooted in human's worth. Colonialism sought not only to rule bodies, but to rule memory. It obscured what we once knew, that we had already declared ourselves free. It suggested that geography defines belonging, and that because Haiti is located in the Caribbean, she's somehow not African. But accepting that logic is accepting the cartography of continents. The separation of geography was their strategy. Reclaiming our unity is our endurance. The tragedy is not that we were enslaved. It is that the memory of our freedom was buried. The global Africa enlightenment is not an invention. It is a remembering, the restoration of a truth Africa once declared, that we are not children of violence. We are inheritors of vision. The Haitian Revolution was not an afterthought. It marked the breaking of slavery's grip and the beginning of Africa's long march towards liberation. It exposed the falsehood of racial inferiority and proclaimed the permanent truth. We were never made to serve. We were made to rise. Colonialism followed, no longer in chains, but in paperwork and policies. It carved borders we did not choose and economies we did not design. Yet, it could not erase who we are. This century now calls for us to finish what our ancestors began. Turn pain into purpose, history into power. Claim the dignity of the future for the lesson of the past. Shape sovereignty not only with flags, but with vision. We are not here to reopen old wounds. We are here to honor them and to let our scars guide us forward. Chinua Achebe thought that suffering must be created. That pain, if it is to mean anything, must give birth to something good and lasting. Haiti gave birth to freedom. From her ordeal emerged a principle Africa knows by heart. No power can enslave a people who remember their name. Achebe also reminded us that while adversity is universal, dignity is a decision. Reparations, therefore, are not the language of revenge. They are a language of repair. The mending of the breach between history and justice. Now, if such repair must begin anywhere, let it begin where the human spirit first proved it could not be owned, in Haiti, Africa's first continent, so that healing may travel home to the mother country. From memory must now come responsibility. From responsibility now must come movement, and from movement must come renaissance. Even in hardship, Haiti was generous, very generous. When liberty trembled in the America, Simon Bolivar found refuge in Haiti. Then our President Pétion gave him ships, arms, and belief, with one condition: wherever he triumphed, slavery must fall. From that fact, the continent took a decisive step toward freedom. Haiti's gift to Bolivar was freedom in action. Even under duress, we turn isolation into influence. Freedom multiplies. It is not diminished when we share. So, if Haiti once armed the liberation of the continent, then Africa today can arm the regeneration of Haiti. Not with muskets, but with markets. Not with warships, but with partnerships. The spirit that carried Bolivar from Port-au-Prince to the Andes must now carry entrepreneurs from Lagos to Port-au-Prince, students from Accra to Cap Haitian, and ideas from Abuja to the wider Caribbean. The old routes of bondage can now become the new routes of belonging through the AFCFTA, through investment corridors, and through a direct Africa-Caribbean air bridge that declares in practical terms what history has always whispered. We are one economic family, not distant neighbors. If history binds us, and culture surely remembers who we are. On Haiti's Independence Day, on January 1st of every year, we drink this pumpkin soup that we call soup jumu. It is a soup that was once forbidden to the enslaved. Just as in Yoruba and Igbo homes, the stews of West Africa carry memory in their aroma. Our proverbs in Haiti answers yo. You say, Akajo Owo, Kapin Soya. Meaning together we live the load. In Haiti we say, Mer pil chai palou, which means many hands make the burden light. The drums that speak in Abeokuta answers the drum in Port-au-Prince. Kompa, remember Highlight. Bodum, remembers Ibi. Empires tried to silence the rhythm. Oceans tried to drown it. Yet Africa's heartbeat crossed the Atlantic and refused to die. Culture is not nostalgia. It is evidence. Evidence that separation was political, not spiritual. Evidence that the global Africa enlightenment is not an invention, but a reunion. If history is memory, then destiny demands motion. Baba's call for the global Africa enlightenment is not poetry, it is policy. A blueprint for the renewal of African civilization in our century and beyond. The early Pan-Africanists dreamed of continental unity. From that dream, as you know, came the organization of the African Unity, and later what we know today as the African Union. Now, that dream must mature. Where Pan-Africanism sought the unity of land, the Enlightenment seeks the unity of lineage. Where it fought for political independence, the Enlightenment calls for intellectual sovereignty. Where it nurtured cultural pride, the Enlightenment demands cultural restitution. Africa is no longer confined by her shorelines. She's a civilization with children scattered yet inseparable. The living organism whose heartbeat echoes across oceans. The global Africa Enlightenment vision rests on three main pillars: that is sovereignty, renaissance, and restoration. Political sovereignty calls for an African Union that no longer waits upon permission to act. It must speak with one voice, decide with one conscience, and stand as a global moral force. A covenant of purpose, not merely the Council of Nations. Economic renaissance transforms reparation from compensation into cooperation. The wealth once extracted from Africa must now become the capital of her regeneration. Through AFCFTA and a unified Afro-Caribbean economic corridor, the routes that carry sorrow can be renewed as arteries of shared prosperity. Cultural restoration is the soul of the Enlightenment. It calls for the return of our languages, artifacts, and stories, not as relics of the past, but as instruments of future power. Culture is not an ornament, it is infrastructure, a spiritual foundation upon which nations stand. Together, these pillars form the moral and strategic architecture of a civilization reclaiming its voice. They find their living expression in Haiti. The first daughter carries Africa's flame across the Atlantic, and who now returns not as a petition, but as proof of what African civilization has always been. At the heart of this vision stands an empty chair. I want you to picture that chair. That chair is not awaiting a guest, but that chair will be welcoming home a child who never truly left. That chair is Haiti's. If Europe can embrace Guadeloupe and Martinique within its union, though they lie in the Caribbean, if the great United States can include Hawaii and Guam across oceans, then surely, Africa, the mother of humanity, can recognize her firstborn, carried her flame through the storm. Haiti's place in the African Union is not symbolic, it is civilization. It affirms the sixth region not as a category, but as kinship. It gives living meaning to the principles of the Constitutive Act, unity, solidarity, and the indivisibility of the African family. It breathes flesh into Agenda 2063, which called for an Africa whose global children walk not beside her, but with her. This moment also answers the spirit of the decade of African roots and the African diaspora. A platform created to reconnect talents, histories, and destinies for sustainable development. Haiti's return would be its highest expression. Memory to movement, from heritage to shared future. I may say, Haiti does not seek inclusion. She brings testimony that African civilization is indestructible. Her presence would not burden the Union, it would complete it, extending Africa's horizon beyond geography to lineage, beyond maps to meaning. For Haiti is not a distant cousin asking for a seat at the table. She's the child once separated by history, returning with proof that her mother's heart still beats in her chest. And when that chair is finally filled, Africa will not be adding a member. She will be healing a circle. A few weeks ago, the African Union had taken a historic step, affirming that slavery and colonialism were crimes against humanity, whose consequences continue to echo across generations. Such recognition is not an appeal for the past to pity, but an invitation to the future for partnership, to rebuild what was broken and to complete what history interrupted. Haiti occupies a singular place in this history. She is the only nation to have paid for reparation in reverse, compelled to compensate her former colonizer for the courage of becoming free. That episode was not only an economic burden, it was a distortion of global justice whose echoes still remain. So, when we speak of reparations, we do not speak the language of grievance. We speak the language of repair, restoring balance between history and humanity. So, let the African Reparations Fund, therefore, be more than a symbol. Let it become an instrument of regeneration, to invest in education, climate resilience, technology and health, to transform old wounds into new opportunities, to replace extraction with partnership. Reparations are not about the past alone. They are about the architecture of a just future. Africa. Africa is rising as a decisive engine of global prosperity. The Africa Free Trade Continental Agreement, the AFCTFTA, more than 1.3 billion of us, over $3.4 trillion offers a new grammar of development. But that engine must hum on both sides of the Atlantic. Let the old slave route become the new corridor of commerce. Ships, that's one carried, chains now carrying knowledge, culture, cocoa, coffee, pharmaceuticals, creative industries, and digital innovation. Yet, there is a practical frontier we must cross. Our ancestors were transported across oceans without document, without consent, without dignity. Surely, their descendants deserve mobility, with dignity, not with barriers, without reflection. Today, for many of African descent in the Caribbean, the path to the continent still passes through former metropoles. This is not geography. It is unfinished history. What if we change that? The distance from Haiti to Senegal is shorter than that from Paris to Lagos, shorter than from London to Johannesburg. What once took our ancestors weeks in anguish could now take hours in dignity. A direct Africa-Caribbean air bridge would be more than connectivity. It would be a civilizational statement that reunion no longer requires permission, that mobility is a right of kinship, that the sky can become a corridor of memory. So let us therefore set a very practical goal. Within 2 years, a regular route linking West Africa and the Caribbean. Not as nostalgia, but as economic infrastructure. The global Africa enlightenment is not only markets and treaties. It is civilization itself. Our music moved the world, Afrobeats and compa, highlights and jazz. Our philosophies traveled further than our passports. Our stories carry codes of endurance. As Baba has reminded us, Africa must tell her own story. Today, we are doing precisely that with African voices. We are doing precisely that with African voices, African memory, African horizon. The Union has advanced our unity with courage, yet unity confined to geography remains incomplete. Ubuntu teaches, I am because we are. But we must include every child of Africa, wherever history places it. To expand membership beyond maps is not to weaken the Union. It is to elevate it into a global moral force. This is how Agenda 2063 moves from vision to victory, from declaration to destiny. Now, the question before us is not whether Africa can unite. It is whether we have the courage to remember who we are. To the youth of Africa, you are not the future of this continent. You are its present heartbeat. So let us pause for a minute. Let us pause for the ancestors are listening. I invite all of you, wherever you come from, whatever your faith, I'm inviting you to feel the presence of those who walk before us in this very moment. I call upon Jean-Jacques Dessalines, who swore liberty would never again bow. Call upon Toussaint Louverture, who married discipline to vision. I call upon Kwame Nkrumah, who declared Africa must unite. Call upon Patrice Lumumba, who died believing she would. I called upon Nelson Mandela, who proved that strength can forget. I call upon Nnamdi Azikiwe, Sikh of Africa, who taught that the freedom of the people begins in the liberation of their minds. And who imagined a Nigeria strong enough to speak not only for herself, but for Africa. I call upon Queen Amina Osaza, Lioness of the Savannah, to forge a kingdom with courage and prove that the destiny of Africa has never been the inheritance of men alone. Their spirits are with us. Their unfinished dream is our unity. And to you, Baba, warrior, statesman, farmer of hope, your life has been the rehearsal of our awakening. May those who follow you walk further because you walk first. So let us proclaim what history has whispered, that Africa is one. Not because borders say so, but because blood and memory do. That the children of Africa, wherever they stand, will no longer be visitors to their own civilization. That Haiti, Africa's first daughter, will one day take her rightful chair, not as a guest, but as family. And when that day comes, the waters that once carried us in chains will carry us home in triumph. For Africa, for Haiti, for the ancestors, for the children yet unborn, may the drums of our unity never fall silent. May the light of this global Africa enlightenment never fade. Amanda, I say, Amen.
Thank you so very much, Your Excellency Ambassador-elect. You may wish to take your seat. We've heard the global Africa enlightenment from change to renaissance.